the ugly stepsister, as opposed to the beautiful stepsister. Has to be ugly because it's a horror movie, right? I don't know. But let's see what this one is about, starting with the IMDb plot and, should she be beautiful or not? I don't know. Follows Elvira as she battles against her gorgeous stepsister. See, beautiful, ugly, told you. In a realm where beauty reigns supreme. She resorts to extreme measures to captivate the prince amidst a ruthless competition for physical perfection. All right, not sure that there's such thing, but anyway. All right, so this is a new film recently released, and it is a foreign film, and obviously, kind of see that with some of the language and obviously, how extreme they kind of get and how they kind of change up the story of Cinderella. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that for those that are going to watch it or watching this review, that you've seen Cinderella and you know the story of Cinderella. So therefore, there's not, I would say, too many twists or turns. There is one thing that kind of happens in the film. I'm not going to go into too much detail because there's probably the most horror of the film, and I want to leave that for you guys to kind of be surprised with and kind of experience as I had to experience it. So I'm not going to go too much into that. But yeah, there's not too many twists or turns in it if you know the Cinderella story. So I'm going to make that assumption that you know that's the story and where this is going to go. So with that, it's, as I said there, the story is going to follow Elvira. She is one of the two daughters here. We know the story from Cinderella. It kind of starts with, the family, the husband, I guess, passed away, and now they're about to lose everything and so forth, and the mother doesn't really have a real good means to support the family. So the solution is to have one of the daughters kind of marry the prince. He's going to be looking for a wife soon, and therefore their problems are solved. It's kind of like winning the lottery. You win the lottery and, everything is all good, or supposedly. And that's their plan. So, as opposed to the story following Cinderella, which is typically done, and, this one is going to follow Elvira. And this is therefore not really going to be a kid-friendly movie. This is not a Disney movie. So, don't get it confused and don't let your children watch this. Really, really shouldn't. Anyway, so, Elvira kind of, doesn't really fit the bill to kind of start as when the mom kind of lays out the plan of marrying the prince. She's kind of like, me, but I'm ugly. How's this going to happen? But, she's faced with the chance to go through, some physical changes. And, she's like, okay, she gets all excited. She wants to help her mom out. She kind of all for it. The other stepsister, she doesn't really go through, much of this, as we saw in the original story, they're both kind of, really going for the prince. But in this one, it's more Elvira than the other one. There's not, this huge competition between the two to get the prince or whatever. The real focus here is Elvira. We'll get to Cinderella here in a minute. So, she starts by, she has braces, and those have to be removed. And this doctor or this guy, I'm really clear who he is, kind of comes in and he kind of just rips them right off. Not kind of the braces that you might think of and so forth. Just kind of rips those suckers right off, and you're kind of like, ugh. Then she needs a nose job, and to kind of further the pain, he just kind of comes in and just knock that sucker a couple of times, and ouch. So if you kind of paying attention and focus on that, you can maybe kind of go along with the pain. She's not on Tylenol. There is no pills that she's taking. No, they didn't give her really any alcohol there. She just kind of takes it. So, that's kind of the first kind of step she kind of goes through. And after that, with the nose thing, she ends up with this thing on her face, which, to kind of, get the nose to settle in the place they want it. And that doesn't really help her looks for a good portion of this thing, because this is really ugly thing that's going over her nose. um, so as she's there with the other girls that are kind of preparing and getting ready for this, she obviously stands out because she has this thing on her face. And she's gonna then go through some other transformations as the kind of film goes on, and as it kind of moves closer to the big ball here. Um, I don't want. I'm not going to mention every single thing she goes through. Like I said, there's one thing I'm leaving out in specific. I guess it kind of has to do with eating and so forth, and it is kind of disgusting and so forth. And like I said, I want you guys to kind of experience that as it is. Eating is part of it. She is a little overweight, trying to lose weight, as this goes. So she is fighting that as it goes. And, that is part of the disgusting part of the film, part of the horror of the film, especially at the end. Kind of leave some of the exact details out so that you guys can experience all that loveliness. So she goes through the steps to get ready for the ball. We all know that that's where we're going. Cinderella is in the story a little bit. We do meet her. She is, doing house stuff for the family here. But, very briefly. We don't get, again, the story is not following her. So we get her, here and there mixed in. We do get a scene where we see her that she actually has already a man in her life, but the mother doesn't approve of her having a man, so she kind of separates them and has him go on his way, and that kind of pisses her off. So, of course, she's then also going to be, going to the ball. And we do get that, a brief, not in a huge expanded way, but a brief kind of, her seeing her mom and, hey, go to the ball and wear this and, in the pumpkin and so forth, but you have to leave at 12, all that kind of stuff, really, but in a fairly quick manner. And, then we have the ball, and, Elvira does well for herself. She's got the eye of the prince and maybe some other people in the room. But then, of course, Cinderella comes and kind of ruins it for her. So that kind of really kicks in the horror that is at the end of the movie. Again, I'll leave some of those details out so that you guys can kind of enjoy that. So for me watching it was a little kind of up and down. Obviously this is, one of the things this movie is described as body horror, and it certainly is that, maybe not in the same way as something like The Substance, because everybody, that is the body horror movie, to go to recently. Not really in that way. And obviously, the movie is definitely a good self-reflection of body shaming and, thoughts of everything, a woman or even a man or anybody who's kind of, worried about their looks in one way or the other and the extremes going through it. So it's a way to kind of tell the Cinderella story and kind of bring that kind of subject to light if you really dig deep into the story here. And obviously, it goes to a little extreme because of the horrors here that are. But, as, those kind of scenes, like I mentioned, the nose scene and, the eating parts, things involved in that. For those of you who have watched it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For those who haven't, once you see it, you'll know more about what I'm mentioning or not mentioning. Those kind of parts were interesting and what had me watching and so forth. Everything else was kind of and, I guess, part of it is, kind of knowing the story of Cinderella, even though it's in a different way. Just, not really wholly interested in, a lot of the other stuff that was going on. There's a scene where, she has to learn to dance and, kind of learn to be kind of a ladylike, to be the wife of the prince. So, there's that kind of stuff. There's a scene, a couple of scenes with her sister. And I know it's kind of like building character, filling time, and kind of doing that kind of thing and kind of showing, the mental part of what she's going through. There's a scene with her in the forest where she actually does get to see the prince. And then, kind of this back and forth between, you know, is she pretty yet? Is she still ugly? That kind of battle. So I get, all the stuff that's going on, and and obviously you have to have the few scenes with Cinderella to kind of set up, what's coming in the end. But I don't know, like that, was just not, really entertaining me. To me, at the end, it really just boiled down to, some of the stuff that she went through, to kind of make this change. They do, again, I'm not going to say the specifics of it, but, the whole shoe thing, once the shoe doesn't, Cinderella kind of leaves the shoe, and then we know that, it's whoever fits the shoe, is going to win the heart of the prince. She does do something very, very extreme here, which added to horror. I didn't expect it, kind of also, hints at her mental state. Her mental state is kind of up and down as the film goes on. So, that's kind of a thing besides the physical transformation. She battles that as it goes. So, I give them props for that. I was not expecting that. That was pretty crazy. And they doubled down on it. So it is, really, I just, I'm not gonna say too much more. I don't want to blow it for you, but that was a nice, addition to kind of the story where they were going in this version of it. And then, in the final moments, again, I don't want to say it, but, not that we might not have seen something, kind of similar to this before, but it is still disgusting to see and nasty and all that, but really hammers away at the horror of it. So there's a couple of things that really hammer everything away at the end of this movie, to kind of really nail the horror down in the movie, which I enjoyed. But I guess getting there was kind of like whatever. I don't I wasn't there to kind of feel her emotions. Like I said, there's a lot of mental going into it with her. And I was just like, I don't know. I just didn't get into that. I was just, interested into, anytime that she was going through a transformation or they were doing something to her, I didn't mention everything they do to her. Obviously, there's a couple of different things they do. Those kind of things, and of course the end. So, I picked the pieces out that I like. I like the true horror of it. Everything else was kind of eh. Obviously, they had a certain way of not only telling the story, kind of shooting the story, and there were some, a little bit weird moments, and I guess it did kind of almost fit into that, almost fairy tale kind of thing, because it almost seemed like dream sequences, but they really weren't, or maybe it was in her head, or I don't know. It was a little weird, but I guess that's the way they went. And again, I was like whatever with that. I would say I've seen a few postings about the movie from some people that have seen it. Seems to be all right. Seems that people are liking it. Again, definitely a good horror version of the story. I give them props for taking a different storyline, not following Cinderella. I give them credit, for that, and telling, what seemed to be, a very solid retelling of it from a different point of view. And again, while it is, I don't want to make a direct comparison to this whole Pooh thing that's going on and Popeye thing that's going on, where, that we're taking these characters and whatever, and, some of those stories are, I don't know, just not that fabulous. I think, the effort here to kind of follow a different point of view and put a good story together and make it really horror, and still, kind of really, not go so far out of the bounds of Cinderella, was good, as opposed to some of that other stuff that I mentioned. So, I think at the end of the day, I'm going to give this one 3 pools of blood. Was in for the horror, maybe not for the other stuff, but can appreciate, what they did and how they did this, and definitely taking a different angle to it. So, lots of appreciation for what they've put together here. And definitely the horror of it. There's definitely some horror moments, and if you're really paying attention, just kind of go along with it, kind of, and they're like smacking her, doing things to her, kind of imagining it happened to you yourself, and you just kind of, yeah, ouch. And that might help a little bit. So 3 pools of blood out of 5 for the ugly stepsister here. So with that, horrorsgorereviews.blogspot.com is where you can find all my reviews, written and video. Certainly lots of video reviews for a while now, so you can like and subscribe and do everything else that everybody wants you to do here on YouTube. But if not, no worries, it is okay. I thank you for your time regardless. Twitter, Facebook information down below. Feel free to join me there. Share your thoughts about this one, and definitely in the comment section once you see it. Feel free to chime in there as well, if you really liked some of the horror that happened in this film and the direction that they took. So with that, I will catch you on the next review, horror fans.